back to RoboReplay. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some matches suggested by viewers and checking out some pretty awesome ideas, strategies, and ways to play REEFSCAPE that we've seen this week. Let's jump right into it, with our first match being the current world high score of 222 down at the Texas District's Waco event. As we start watching this insane match put up by 148 and 3005 on offense, I do want to point out that the other alliance, as is true for most world records, isn't able to send defense over. So 148 and 3005 are just able to score completely uncontested. And as we start looking at this match, I do want to point out that we're going to see a lot of Algae here, which is really contributing to this score, right? Because as they're going for these L4s, they're able to pick up the Algae as they're coming down and then go score it in here instead of having to go for the coral and then come back and then pick up the Algae and then score the coral and then go place the Algae. Instead, they're optimizing it by taking the Algae as they're coming down from the coral, and they're able to just make as many efficiencies as possible, which is what leads to a world record like this. And even in this world record, we can see that they're still not perfectly efficient, which is absolutely insane to think about, right? We see this coral here that 148 might have missed, and we might see some other game pieces that end up getting missed or opportunities that aren't perfect, which I think is incredible to think about considering how many game pieces were really scored in this match. And as we start looking, I think that one of the biggest things to look at here is just how they were scoring these pieces as they went from, in an Elam's match, splitting the field up in half, again, as we saw in Quals, with two robots who are so powerful. You can just split the field up in this way, and 3005 gets one in front of them, 148 gets what's in front of them, and you have perfect robots who can score all the branches in front of them really efficiently. And these robots, I'm sure, have great control systems and are able to do the backside even faster as well. So by splitting the reef up in this way, I think that it's going to end up being a lot easier for most teams, as I don't think we'll end up seeing the reef split up in this sort of way, or rather down the middle here, even if a team is better at scoring on the backside, just because it's more efficient to score in front of you. And I also want to point out that these teams also didn't collect any of the Algae here on the ground or knock them over, which did help contribute to how fast they were actually able to drive back and forth, right? Because with no defense on this side, the only game pieces on the ground are the ones that you choose to knock over or not let roll around, which leads to something like Algae bumping around into you if you're able to just knock it over by accident. So not having that Algae roll around and just having straight lines back and forth here really help the efficiency, and I think that that's something we might see if no defense ends up showing up in some of your matches. And as we can see here, we'll see that red ends up with a final score of 222. A large part of it does come from the Algae here, and we do see 137 coral, which is absolutely insane, but this 52 Algae number is ginormous, and I think is really what helped them get this number so high, is because of the fact that they're able to score the Algae as they're coming down from scoring a coral, and keeping that efficiency is going to be key in making sure you're able to optimize your scores. Now, we're going to hop over to the Lake Superior Regional and take a look at Alliance 4, consisting of 2022 World Champs 1619, as well as 5903 and 3100. I think that the way this alliance was created and made is extremely interesting, and if this was an event, say in week 3 or further on, when the event could be deeper in terms of points scoring from lower ranked robots, then I think this alliance and the way the 1619 picked this alliance would have won this entire event. What 1619 ended up doing here as a captain was choosing 3100 as the Alliance 4 first pick. And something interesting to note about 3100 is that they are a hard-focused Algae bot, instead of doing what everybody else in the entire rest of the world is doing and choosing a second coral bot. And so the reason that they're doing this, and they're picking a hard Algae bot who can score at a pretty reasonable pace, but doesn't have nearly as many scoring opportunities or is slightly less efficient because the pathing and cycling time between the different Algae compared to just going to the coral station of the reef is longer, is because they believe that they would have ended up with their second pick, taking 5903. They believe that 5903 is good enough to pair with 1619 and 3100 to create a triple offense attack that can beat any alliance at this event. Now, I think that if this event happened in week 3, where teams had more time to prepare themselves and were getting better and better, and 5903 was just a little bit better, that they would be able to completely win this entire event out, as this strategy ended up looking pretty good, but sadly they weren't able to actually win the event because of just week one issues and people not being as good at the game yet as they would be in future weeks. We can see here that 3100, right? They're going to be doing full algae, and this is the only way I think I really want to see an offense attack of triple offense, where you have one robot doing algae, and then you have 1619 taking one half of the field, or any first alliance captain, and then you have 5903 on the other side of the field, taking up this portion of the reef. And what this allows you to do is now, if we split up the field into different zones that people are going to take over, this causes zero congestion, because you'll have the 3100 algae bot taking over all of this sort of area, and going to whenever there's algae, right, picking it off the reef, going to pick it up. So this is going to be 3100's area. This entire half of the field will end up being 1619's area, right? And 3100 also gets a little bit here, right, in case any algae starts rolling over. And then you'll have 5903 on this end just doing their cycles. And so I think this is a great way to mitigate some of the issues that we found with triple coral scoring, where you'll end up with two robots trying to collect at the same time, or congestion, and that just ends up really ruining you when you're starting to play against a defense robot, as we see here from 6574. And so I think that this is a great way to just draft in general. And if we end up seeing here, this match ends up going down to only 10 points. And I think they honestly could have won this Finals 2 match if they just chose to climb later, or 5903 just ended up putting some more coral in, right? You can see they missed an L4 here. They had some missed opportunities before as well. And 5903 decides at 46 seconds that they're going to go posture for a climb. And I think that we talked about 190 yesterday, climbing at like 15 seconds or something, which is really relatively low. But I think that going at 40 seconds like this is on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you're climbing actually a little bit too late or too early, and because you're trying to confirm that climb, you end up making it so that you lose out on a ton of points here that could have won you the match. And as we'll see at the end of the match, they'll end up losing by 10 points, and we have 3100 and 5901 essentially having 40 seconds that they're not able to use. And so the moment they started the climb, 36 seconds, they're both going to end up on the cages at about, you see, 25 seconds. So it takes them 10 seconds to do this climb, and about like 15 seconds-ish to end up with this one, right? So if they just left a little bit later, let's say at 20 seconds, I think that you might have gotten a 2 corals here. Maybe you pick up this algae here, put it in your barge, steal another algae, put it in your barge. You could have won this match, but instead they choose to go on the safe side, and that ends up losing the match, as they're already down 10 points, and both alliances ended up getting a triple climb. All in all, I think this is a really interesting strategy and way of drafting from 1619 that I really liked, even though it didn't win them this event. I think that if you end up in an event where you're in like a middle alliance area, where you're not good enough to be the Alliance 1, where you'll have 2 powerhouse coral robots, or Alliance 2, where you could end up with those big coral robots that'll end up getting you to the finalist area, then I think that the best course of action is to see, hey, is there a specialist in algae that we can use? And if our event is deep enough and we judge that we can drop our coral robot to the end there, and in this case 5903 can get picked like 13 robots after what you normally would have picked a coral robot at, then you think that that's going to be good enough for your alliance to continuously be scoring coral as well as getting that huge algae output from your algae robot. Then I think Alliance 4 and 5 and maybe even 6 might end up going for this style of triple offense, where instead of going for, say, 3 coral robots because of all the congestion that we talked about, you go with an algae robot to clear up that congestion, as well as 2 coral robots, which I think is also going to be something that you should be doing in Alliance 8 or 7, where you don't really have the firepower to keep up with Alliance 1. So you need to be putting up points all the time. And I think that algae and algae specialists are going to be really big in this game as either first picks in events where there is a lot of coral scoring and the coral depth is really high, or second picks in events where people need that coral robot first, and they look at you as the algae specialist that's the best and be like, hey, come to our alliance, we need this congestion cleared up, and we need an Algae bot who can poach from their lines. Now we're going to start off with 427 immediately after auto running towards 2539, and they're going to be playing man defense for them throughout this entire match, and mostly focusing on limiting 2539 instead of really going for 341. But whenever 341's in the way, they'll give it a little love tap. And the first thing that we'll see 427 do is immediately try to get in front of 2539. And we see here that that doesn't really work all that well, and they end up just pinning them instead of trying to get in front of them, as 2539 is able to see directly in front of them, and they're able to just move out of the way, as they have a much better sight line than 427 does on them. So this ends up giving them a pin, which is something that you'll see a lot this match, of whenever 427 is playing towards the side like this, or whenever 2539 is actually in the coral station, they'll end up being a little bit too close here, and they'll give up a pin, which I think in this game is really bad because the pin counter is only 3 seconds. So after 2 seconds of pinning, you just have to run away and try to avoid that foul, which is not really great for defense. Instead of going for pins, you want to just be blocking as much as you can. But obviously this comes with time, and is something that we're going to learn throughout the entire season. So I like this already from 427, as we can see that what they're doing is their entire idea of defense is that they want to play when 2539 is not near them against the alliance wall, and you're going to see this a lot from them. And the reason they want to do this is because if 2539 wants to go here, they think that they can just gun it and for a straight shot and block 2539, and if they're not, then they can rotate themselves and get this corner of their swerve out a little bit wide and block them from getting in, which I think is a really great idea overall compared to just sitting at one coral station, which we see a lot of robots doing in defense this entire week, and getting no value, as after the two opposing robots are able to stagger their cycles, you're getting essentially 0 value from just sitting here. So let's see how 427 does this, and as we can see, 2539 sees that 427 is sitting here, and they see, importantly, that Miss Daisy is over here blocking the 427 sweep, and they say, okay, let's just go collect something on the other coral station here. And we can see 427 start swinging over, and perfect adaptation from this here. As soon as they see 427 leave, Krypton Cougars are like, wait, 427 is all the way over there, we don't need to go here. Let's get some value over here first by ripping out an Algae, and then go back to our own coral station, which is a really heads-up play that I enjoy, getting value even when you're just trying to get to the coral station. And we can see 427 gets over here and gets on them. And this is something that I think 427 does quite a bit of, which is where they're pushing on Krypton Cougars over here when they're against the coral station, which I really don't like, because what ends up happening is they end up getting the pin count started, and then they have to leave, and then Krypton Cougars gets a free cycle. And this happens quite a lot throughout this entire match, but I think the adaptation to this is 427, if they just back up a little bit here, then you could end up giving Krypton Cougars space, so it doesn't get counted as a pin, right? Because you're giving them space to move around, but you just trap them inside that space. Because if they're trying to go right, then where are they going to go? You just shut them down this way. If they try to go left, translate upwards. If they try to rotate, back up, and then rotate with them. And if they try to go backwards or forwards, you're essentially either pushing on a coral station to give yourself more space, or you just try to run into a 427 hoping that they move out of the way. And this is really, really similar to what 321 did last year against 1323 at Worlds, where we had the same actually idea here of choke point here, corner wall. And so since there's this little area that you can play around, sit here. Are you going to go this way? Cut you off. Are you going to upwards? Cut you off. And are you going to go straight? Okay, try pushing through me. Except this time, there's no hole in the middle for you to go through. But instead, it's just a safe zone. So I think that if we use 321's ideas from last year in this game, it could be really effective, as just sitting back, not causing that pin, is a lot better in this game compared to when 321 was trying to slam you against the alliance wall, because the pin count is only 3 seconds instead of 5 seconds. So we'll see. Yep, 427 just moves out of the way here, and Krypton Cougars goes to get a coral. And then here, Krypton Cougars just able to go faster. Great movement from them. Gets a coral, and then back able to score it. And 427 here, I don't really like this posturing as much, because although they're playing on the alliance wall, I think that this positioning means that you can't see yourself, right? So unless you know exactly where you are, because of 427's line of sight, right? They're in the middle driver station. They have to look through this reef. They have to look through this barge, and this entire reef is blocking their drivetrain, which means that unless you know exactly where you are and exactly how far away you are from each side of the field, it's going to be really easy for 2539 to just bait you either way and just say, go this way. And then you just have to trust that they're going, and you move to the side, and then 2539 just gets a free coral station over here. And as we see, what's happening is, yeah, 427 isn't able to see where they are because they're positioned towards the middle, and they're getting blocked off by this whole reef area, and they end up being a little bit slow to the gun because of that. And again, same idea, 427's doing the pin again. If they back up a little bit, I think they get a lot more value. But that's just me. And so then we get 427 positioning in a way that I really like here. This is what I think is the best way to position, but the alliance wall strategy also works if you need to give yourself more time, is positioning right here. Except I would like 427's long side bumper to be over here, because then you're able to get more contact with the 2539 bumper, which just gives you more power to push against them. So the reason I like here, I've talked about in different videos before, is because you can try to slip yourself over towards the other coral station if 2539 ends up going that way, or you can just rotate yourself and bam, you're blocking them off from getting into this coral station. And you can rotate with them and just move around with them and just slow them down in general. And so 2539 does a pretty good bait here, where instead of going just directly through the reef like this and cutting really close, they do take a little bit of a wide path, getting 427 to bite, and great bait, and then they rip their way to the coral station, which is just some excellent driving from one of the best teams of First Mid-Atlantic. And actually, here, I do like the 427 does pushes that here, because of how strong their drive base is. They're actually able to ruin 2539's collecting for quite a bit, right? As we see, they push them from all the way here, all the way to the side, and then angle them a little bit. So this coral isn't able to go in until this very end, and then they get that coral, right? And then you slow them down a bit, do a little bit of chip, and then we back to posturing somewhat towards this coral station, and beautiful driving here from, I think, one of the best teams in First Mid-Atlantic. They do the bait again, but the opposite way this time, where instead of taking the bait where they're going for a little jiggle here, and then they go back up, as 427 probably expects them to do since they did it once already, they do a bait here, and they do a bait up, and then go back in, which 427 bites on, as with this little amount of space, you can't really afford to not bite on it. And they do some pretty decent collection defense, right? Hit them around a bit, maybe stall 1 or 2 seconds out, which is all you can really do. And then they posture up, and then I think this maneuver is just beautiful. If we just go back 5 seconds here, let's just look at what 2539 does here. Right, 427 is on you, and since you know 427 is going to be pushing down on you, just translate out of the way. Great movement. And the only reason that's actually able to be done is because of the fact, let's go back here for a second and look at how this pin worked. Is the only reason that's able to be done is because 427, there's short side bumper on them. And because the extra length isn't here to stop this translation and moving out, and it's a short side bumper, 427 ends up just getting pushed past and just rams into the coral station wall because they don't have that extra leverage of the 2 extra corners of the bumpers being rectangular. So then we see 2539 do some more scoring. Great job, great defense here, slowing down that coral a little bit, and then doing some great matching here, right? They see Miss Daisy going to collect, so then they come back down. 427 doesn't bite too hard on the other coral station, doesn't fly too fast, and they're able to knock them up a little bit. And we can see here, again, back to trying to just wait for them to collect the coral. And here, I mean, once they get the coral, it's kind of gone. So just move out of the way. Let's see what we can do to stop Miss Daisy. And once Krypton Cougars are done, we'll go back on them. And that's exactly what happens. And I think that this coral cycle could have been prevented if they moved a little bit down here. But again, every single one of these movements that I've been talking about is a very small movement in a very small amount of time. And considering these drivers are all week 1 drivers, I'm extremely impressed with them for even getting the concept down to be able to execute it at the level they are right now. And again, we see 427 with their pin again. And I think that this is something they'll learn from, as when they watch back this match, they'll definitely see that the pins are what's costing them a large amount of time in time defended, because they're being forced to move away so much, right? And then another 25-39, beautiful bait here, right? This driving is just pristine. Going a little bit up, getting 427 to move, and then you cut back in. It's just great. And yeah, this was the matches that you guys suggested for me. Thank you guys so much for suggesting matches. These were all great and insightful for me to look into, as I hope they got you guys interested as well in all the different ways you can play strategy and defense and picking and REEFSCAPE. This was another episode of RoboReplay, and thank you for watching. Have a lovely day.